Now, we need to connect a few threads between the other requisites and the Eightfold Path. The Eightfold Path is the sort of master design of the whole process of the Dhamma, and the rest of the 29 factors have some relationship to it. Some of them are very obvious. But we should just go over what this right view is. Right view, by the way, is one of the 5 factors which involve wisdom. So the 5 wisdom factors are the 5th of the faculties, the 5 faculties is panya, wisdom, and the 5 powers, panya, wisdom. Vimamsa, that's in the Iddhipadas. The last factor of the 4 Iddhipadas, the 4 bases of success, is Vimamsa, and that is a form of wisdom as well. And then, of course, in the 7 factors of enlightenment, you have this Dhamma Vichaya, which is a type of wisdom as well. So 5 factors of wisdom. They're all slightly different, but they all involve not just analytical thinking, but more or less priority thinking. What is the difference between intelligence and wisdom? What is the difference between cleverness and wisdom? What is the difference between being smart and being wise? This is a whole topic in itself, maybe one of the critical topics for this time in history, in the world. Because we do have a lot of amazing information and analysis. We have all of what science has produced, technology. We have access to incredible amounts of information, history, etc., sociology, psychology. And people are busy their whole lives, and they get rewarded, they get livelihoods out of it, they get Nobel Prizes out of it. But are those activities, would we call them wise? Are those people wise? And what is it? What is this wisdom? So wisdom is evaluation, and it can't be determined by any other way. It's kind of like a sense of art or beauty. You can't go deeper than the decision in life about what to do with your life and what the values are. We're playing around with artificial intelligence and all this stuff now, so it certainly can be very clever, but can it ever know what the most important thing for it to do is? So this is something that, how could it know? And even how does a human know? This is wisdom. You either have it or you don't. If you don't have it, you can be persuaded to it, possibly. It means that you have some degree of wisdom, or you just blunder into it, and that's a good fortune. You fall in with good company. This was kind of the preoccupation also of the great Greek philosophers who lived about the time of the Buddhas. They were Plato's famous, and Socrates' famous, the interest in the good, the true, and the beautiful. Not just facts. They were interested in facts as well, but what is the good and what is the beautiful? And is truth, does it reveal something beautiful? So this is also the distinguishing mark of the Buddha as well. What do you prioritize in your existence? What do you have to do? What do you need to be careful about? He's in a period of history where there's a lot of openness. You can propound your theories about religion, the gods, materiality, ideas about how the universe works, without too much fear of being banished or killed or something like that. I mean, there's been times in history, especially more in the West, in the last 1,500 years, where it's really dangerous to propose anything except the dogmatic teachings of the church. You risk your life. But there were periods before that, as in Greece, where you could speculate, although it didn't end well for Socrates. He had to drink the hemlock, and that was because he had problematic opinions, apparently. The Buddha was not popular either in some quarters. He was undermining some of the religious authority of the Brahmins and so forth. So he was reviled in some places. There were even attempts on his life, and certainly attempts to discredit, and lots of arguments as well, philosophical arguments. But he was very much determined to establish this Dhamma. He just thought it was the highest of the values. And he's using up his time on earth to do it. And it's certainly voluntary. It's not something that you have to. In some ways, so that school of Buddhism, the early school of Buddhism, which we might identify as Theravada or pre-Theravada, Theravada is very much in line with that, is of the opinion that, the progress towards enlightenment, personal liberation is personal and can't be done by anybody else for you, must be done by yourself, and that whether or not anybody else does it or listens to you in any way, you are not obliged to educate or save anybody else. You can accomplish your own true peace of mind, your own well-being, and it does not require that anybody else goes along for the ride with you, that you achieve anything, or that you need to convert a certain number of people to it, or anything like that. It's a freestanding, independent. Many philosophies and religions entangle you in the idea that you're responsible for enlightening others, and that you can't possibly be okay unless you do. But that's quite a guilt trip to lay on you, a responsibility trip. And so this is something that's important to know. The Buddha says, I attained enlightenment, and primarily without a teacher as well. And it's unshakable. Doesn't depend on how many people I succeed in convincing about this at all. And after all, he was quite hesitant to teach and thought, I might not be able to convince anybody of this or educate anybody about it, but I'll give it a shot. But that decision to do that is purely out of compassion. It's not compulsory. His own sense of completion, well-being is not up for any kind of possibility of loss in the process of offering it to others. He doesn't need to convince anybody. So this is very important. Also, he's establishing this as a result of personal effort and insight. And at the time in India, there was a great deal of philosophies that involve other kind of magical or outward forces that you needed to rely on for your well-being, all across the ancient world. Other invisible dimensions and beings and so forth, that you needed to be on your side, and you needed to find out how to get them on your side, or you needed pardon from them in some way, or benefits from them. And you needed maybe magical spells or rites and rituals to accomplish this. So this is quite a radical departure from that. It is an insistence on personal development and an endeavor. So this attitude is part of what's called right view. And what is the wisdom of this right view is to give priority to ethics and moral consequences. And it's absolutely necessary to be convinced of that there are consequences to thoughts, speech, and action. And those things are not something which a society or a group can establish for you. It's not simply the following of the community standards. Each person is responsible for their decisions, the emotional processes, the attitudes that they have. And this is very, very important in order to alleviate suffering. So that's another wisdom judgment, which can't be determined by just intellect. There's lots of very bright people that can't grasp the idea of why one should overcome suffering. Some people when they hear about Buddhism as an aspiration to freedom from suffering, they often don't understand it and presume that there are certain reasons for inflicting suffering on yourself, and say for the sake of justice or for the sake of some ambition or other things. Usually that's just a misunderstanding. Buddhism is not about irresponsibility or a lack of concern for others. It's laced through with loving kindness, compassion, celebration of others' well-being and happiness, and also, of course, great advocate for generosity and proper social treatment of others. All of this is entailed in right view. But the essence of right view is also that ethics and morality, and not merely the behavior, but the intention behind your speech and action, has to be informed by a certain attitude. And that attitude is that the situation is, in the existence realm, is ultimately unsolvable. The problem is unsolvable as long as you're in a situation where it's unstable and uncertain and changing all the time. Anicca is the Pali word for this, and then dukkha, that inherent in this transient, flowing, changing inner world and outer world is some inevitable problems, suffering. The body is vulnerable to pain. The mind is subject to various types of shocks as well. So this is part of right view. And the major understanding of right view is the absence of a fixed personality, an enduring, unchanging element within you, often referred to as the soul in the West. And in the East, Atman. Atman is a kind of the Sanskrit atta, the self, as an indivisible, unchanging, immortal, unaffected by all of the moral dimensions and so forth that travels through time unchanged. This is the competing philosophy. You find this in the Upanishads, which are just slightly before the time of the Buddha, and forms a lot of the ideas of Hinduism as well. So he's making an incredible breakthrough there that you don't find in any other structures. An examination of this idea of this eternal, unchangeable me, and he finds that there is nothing that corresponds to that. You cannot find anything that corresponds to that, which is turns out to be it's good. It's a good thing. It also means that, and he's saying that virtually, transformation, the possibilities of change are unlimited. And if you know the rules of how to move through the universe, you can move in any direction. If you don't know that, it's chaos, and it might go well for you. You might blunder into some good sort of situations and things get better. But if you don't understand the principles of it, the basic laws of how being works, then it's a very precarious situation, and you can make some great blunders and proceed downwards into more suffering, more problems. So this is also right view. This is roughly what karma is. A redoing of the whole word karma. Karma just means action. It's just the root of doing. It just means doing. And it had various meanings before the Buddha. The Buddha is giving it a special new spin. And it's the moral dimension of life, the importance of the moral dimension. And the moral dimension is also another way of talking about positive emotions. So this is what right view involves. And that's why you see so many threads connecting it to the other groupings of the 37 requisites. Notice that in the 7 factors, of course, these very positive emotional states are going to be arising, and that is joy, we talked about the serenity quite a bit last night, and then concentration and equanimity. These are all very, very beautiful states of being, and in order for those to arise, one has to get a hold of right view. For them to rise in a sustained way, so that you can remain in the field of those positive emotions, because of course, joy is different than serenity, it's different than deep concentration, it's different than equanimity. That they change, they flow, they're available to the enlightened mind and the unenlightened mind as well, if you know how to bring them into existence and sustain them. And so this is part of the education. It starts out with right view. He explains it in the Four Noble Truths to some degree, but not all of the fourth truth is the Eightfold Path. So the Four Noble Truths contain the Eightfold Path. The Eightfold Path contains the Four Noble Truths as right view. Call that recursive explanation. This includes that, and that includes that. I don't know if you've ever seen that drawing. Who is it by? Where it's a hand drawing itself. Escher, yes. The hand is drawing itself. And that's recursive. So this is kind of the essence of it, is to bring all of these threads together, so that you really have an understanding. But it's really about the human heart. It's and most appreciated in the human heart, but only the developed human heart. There are humans that don't have access to these things. They're without empathy, there's no sense of identification with others or anything like this. So they cannot make progress. Sociopath, psychopath, that kind of thing. So this is where, and of course they can do intelligent things, Sociopaths, psychopaths can be quite bright. They can be very clever with certain things, but it has nothing to do with this wisdom, because the wisdom is always around the nature of the heart as well. And so Buddhism should never be contemplated as some abstract ideas. The ideas are brilliant, very intriguing, impressive how a person of the 5th century BC could come up with these things. The Buddha describes all kinds of ways of analyzing or understanding the cosmos, the universe, and so forth. And some of his ideas about the dimensions of the universe are right in line with the most modern astrophysics and cosmology now. You wonder, how did they figure that out? Because similar cultures that were not in communication with them had very much smaller ideas about the nature of the universe. So it's impressive, his intuitions and his intellect and so forth, but none of that is why we should be interested in Dhamma or Buddhism. It's because it addresses the human condition, the heart of the matter. Why, what should we be doing in our lives? How should we feel? How shall we navigate this situation called existence in the midst of all of this, all these other people around us as well? All these infinite numbers of living beings. We have an attitude for this. And of course, the modern world is in a state of confusion about this. They keep restructuring things and making new decisions about how to relate to other beings, especially outside the human level. I mean, if you look at human history, it's never been it's blood-stained, very gory, and very cruel, almost unbelievably so. The kind of things that went on in even advanced cultures, Greek, Roman, Middle Eastern, European, and so forth, are just, it's a shock to read about. People had an entire distance from what we would now call the norms of dignified relationships to other humans, let alone animals. In the West, we're just in the last century or so, we're starting to, think that animals can feel something. It's quite advanced. This SPCA, the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, fairly recent idea, maybe 19th century, late 19th century. No concept of appreciation of these beings as having any feelings and so forth. The Buddha is just immensely ahead of his time. He's saying all these living beings, these conscious living beings, they all know what pain is. They avoid pain. They flee from death. They have a life. You should not overlook that. You should see that. You should become aware of that and not inflict pain on them. As you know, you don't like it yourself. So he's extending this sense of compassion quite beyond humans, and to realization that all these beings they have structures which appreciate staying alive and not in pain. This also is part of right view. So right view, if understood, then it manifests in right intention, the second factor of the Eightfold Path. And right intention is non-ill will, non-cruelty, or the thought of cruelty, and renunciation. So this is how you know, if you understand right view, that you start to genuinely have an idea about that one should not have a hostility to other beings. And of course, not to oneself either. If you're getting the idea of right view, that's what informs right intention, non-ill will, the absence of that basic, it's a form of mild, all the way from the mild irritability to cold hatred. It's that spectrum of aversion. And you see, as I was saying, just read history, you see what people did to each other and to the whole realm of the living beings as well. Staggering. And the other one next to it is the thought of cruelty. So you can be angry, but not, you're angry at somebody, but you don't want to torture them. You don't hope that they die in a car accident or, fall and break their arms or, so these are two different levels of it. Ill will is just a lack of, a complete radiation of dislike. But the next element is a definite wish for the harm to that being, that they suffer pain. And you see people easily swing into that. They really don't like that person, and they really hope that that person suffers. So these are two things that have to go. If you understand right view, those intentions, those are intentional attitudes, those emotions dissolve. And now this is where right effort comes in, because right effort is referring to this as well. Because you can forget. You get a glimpse into right view, you get a glimpse into the cosmic realization that all these beings are like me. I mean, how do we get here? Nobody knows how we arose. The Buddha doesn't try to even answer that. He has no answer for how did this start, who made this, what made this. Just forget it. You don't have time for that. You're never going to find out. Just here's the situation. This is what you have to deal with. You're some sort of product of the universe, and everybody else is too. And look into yourself to find out what you don't like and what you like, and then you'll know a lot about what they like and don't like. You are seeing yourself in others. And that's the spiritual breakthrough. It opens the heart, You start to have empathy. Mostly it's usually achieved. Artists are doing this all the time. Great writers are doing this all the time. And it's usually through going inside a single individual. It's hard to, big masses of people, it's hard to identify with. But when you take one person out of it, you see this in a war situation. They'll just take one child out of the situation that's been injured and has lost their parent, and you suddenly think, what are people doing? That's that moment of recognition. So that's part of right view as well, recognition. The Buddha, there are many passages in suttas, especially in the Dhammapada, very beautiful passages, to see yourself in others, to recognize that. I mean, I went in university, you go to these philosophy courses and so forth, you discuss ethics and why you shouldn't do that. You can come out of that after years and still have not an idea what is right, or why be good. Is there a good? On and on and on. It goes. I sat down and I was reading the Dhammapada, And there was a passage in it. All beings fear death. They tremble before violence. Knowing this, how can you hurt them? For me, that was better than all the philosophy courses on ethics. It's like, you can't, there is no other way to, if you don't get it at that level, there is no possible way to get it. They fear death. They tremble before violence. Me too. I don't like it. Knowing that, now what's your attitude? If you need more of an explanation than that, there isn't one. It just stops there. You either get it or you don't. So this is part of the, right, I mean, to come to these views is really where the intellect can't go there. The arguments can't go there because the arguments go off the track. In fact, this is early philosophy as well. All kinds of Greek philosophers are discussing ethics, and they did it in India as well. They had all kinds of endless discussions of bypassing this whole just straightforward compassion and empathy. There was a type of materialist philosopher that, since you're made up basically of atoms, when you kill an enemy, basically the sword doesn't actually cut them, it just goes between the atoms. So really there's no ethical problem with that, it's just because you're actually made out of 7 elements and none of them are cuttable. So wherever the sword goes, it has to go between the 7 elements. So it really doesn't kill it. You're not really doing anything. You can end up, this is where philosophy can end up. These are the ethical things. This is still what we do with war. We make sure that the enemy is not human. we turn them into something else so that, killing them is really not, it's not like us, So you get rid of that empathy and so forth. But this is where the intellect, the mind can't go there, and all the reasons that you can produce can't get it. But when you drop that and feel it directly, then it's utterly convincing, and nothing more can be said about it. So this is the nature of the ethics. The Buddha doesn't. He gets people coming and arguing with him about some of these points. He says, well, I'm not here I don't get any brownie points for convincing you of anything. I mean, I'm offering this to you. Take it or leave it. But, the intellect it just spins its wheels. It's why in the 5 faculties, one side is panya, or wisdom, which is to do with intelligence as well, and the other side is faith. And these 2 things have to balance each other, because intellect and so forth you can virtually circle around for infinity without commitment. So the faith is necessary. The actual faith is more like making a move, making a commitment, doing it, making a decision, how you're going to proceed through this life. And the Buddha is that kind of teacher. So the last of the 3 right intentions is this renunciation. And renunciation, nikama, is a loss of naive, passionate interest in shallower things. Just accumulation of a lot of stuff. You realize that the life is not fulfilled through that. There's another level of the game that comes through the right view, and then that turns into this relinquishment. You're just a diminishment of interest in superficial accumulation of things. And that can include your, aspirations to fame and egoistic kind of things as well. It just it starts to be just less meaningful. That just naturally occurs because of the reflections in right view. The reflections on the inevitability of death, the fragility of it as we go along, and how, we're not really all that independent anyway. As soon as we get sick, we got to be taken care of by somebody else, and we're vulnerable, fragile. Sometimes we need help and so forth. So monastics. The Buddha sets up the monastic lifestyle as a kind of a striving for psychological independence, but not material independence. We're to remain dependent. First of all, our first dependence is on a teacher for the first 5 years. We're dependent on the Sangha, and then we're dependent on the lay people for food and a few other material things. And the Buddha is dead set against us becoming independent, materially independent. Like, we could go off and, why don't we just go off and raise a garden and live in the mountains? Never come out. Wouldn't that be more independent? Material independence is an illusion. Nobody is independent materially. You are just that far away from needing some help from somebody. You're dependent for your education, your training, your skills. All of these things you completely need, especially as a human. I mean, maybe a bear doesn't, but a human does. They so rely on human teaching and examples and so forth. Occasionally you see these unfortunate situations where some child is abandoned and feral, and then they never learn to walk properly or speak, or it's a useless thing. But or even in these orphanages where they were never touched, they often are damaged and never emotionally can recover. So humans are very, very depend on each other. But at the same time, the Buddha is encouraging strength to cultivate and develop your inner life and strengthen that so that you are emotionally well and a light unto yourself. And this can be, of course, very helpful to others in difficult times. Somebody who is equanimous and not swept away is very, very important. So I will leave this for tonight. We got through the first 2 factors of the Eightfold Path.